Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Compliance Report International Edition with Compliance Man Goes Global, Episode 3. This is the podcast where, together with Timur Khasanov-Batirov, we take a look at compliance in emerging markets through a Q&A dialogue that Tim and I engage in. So we take two concepts, or actually probably misconceptions, from the in-house compliance reality, and then we check out whether these concepts work in emerging markets. Both Tim and I split up the discussion. We advocate one particular concept identifying pros, and then we'll do the same identifying cons. And hopefully we'll come up with some practical solutions for the in-house compliance practitioner in emerging markets. It's a lot of fun. It's a good dialogue, and hopefully will give you some ideas on arguments that you could use in your discussions with colleagues at compliance programs and with senior management in emerging markets. This is Tom Fox. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Compliance Report International Edition, which is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm back. I am the Compliance Evangelist, and I am back for another episode of Compliance Man Goes Global with my good friend and colleague, Timur Khasanov-Batirov. I hope I'm getting close to the right pronunciation of your name, Tim. Anyway, Tim and I have come up with a series that we're putting on where we take a deep dive or look into some conventional wisdom or myths about the compliance profession, particularly where Tim practices in high risk in emerging markets. So we pair this with the Compliance Man Illustrated that Tim puts out, and then we have our podcast and then some text. So hopefully these will give you some ideas if you're faced with any of these questions in any markets, particularly outside the U.S., where Tim really focuses on. So Tim, with that short introduction, how about we just jump right into it today?
Yes, sounds great.
Okay, so what we do is we throw out a myth or a concept, and then we argue both sides of it and see if we can come to some, if not resolution, agreement. So with that, Tim, let me go with corporate concept number one. And this is one that I think we've got two today that really speak directly to the compliance professional. So on number one, and here, let's be frank, practicing compliance is one thing, and certainly you and I would understand what that means as compliance professionals. But what about people who work in the corporation, the employees, the non-compliance employees in a company? Do they really care about compliance? So based upon your in-house experience, what do you think are some of the assumptions that exist and have support among non-compliance professionals and employees inside of a company?
Yes, Tom, thanks for raising a very actual question, which is on the agenda of many compliance practitioners. There are some assumptions which compliance practitioners have been facing in the corporate life, and let me give you some examples. So the main idea that sometimes we have faced that personnel think that the compliance, is just something which compliance people should take care of. So they have some justification for that, and I think for compliance community it would be interesting to hear what we hear sometimes. So first of all, by analogy with other departments which deal with assigned areas of responsibility as sales or finance, compliance department in views of ordinary personnel is responsible for compliance. That's simple. Consequently, per this corporate theory, compliance department should be in charge of compliance, whatever it means. Another assumption, which unfortunately could be faced on practice, is the following. You might face the theory that management and compliance are not sitting in the same boat. This could be clearly seen in budgeting process, for instance. Compliance faults are viewed by top management as just subordinates like others. Compliance department asks for money as others do, so it is not a big deal to reject this request in the same way they reject requests from any other unit. one more assumption or theory which exists in the corporate world. So business leaders are not aware that per regulatory expectations, like, for example, evaluation of the corporate compliance program by DOJ, it should be them, I mean, those business leaders, not solely compliance personnel responsible for modeling proper behavior to personnel. Consequently, top managers guess that compliance teams is the only player to name when you refer to corporate integrity or regulatory expectations. So these are assumptions which take place in practice sometimes.
Yes, let me take this let me take it in a little bit different direction and see if there's a way that we can maybe push these two together. The two being, one being the compliance professional in a corporation, and then two, the senior management and the employee base. The first one is that there is actually a difference between the compliance function in an organization and other functions such as sales, internal audit, legal, you name the corporate function. And the in-house function is, compliance function is there to really help the company do compliance. Then they facilitate the process, implement measures, put on training, put on controls, be there for communications and answering questions, providing advice, all of those things. But the actual doing of compliance, how do you do that? That is really something that the employees do. And that's an effective compliance program is when the salespeople are doing compliance. And so it may sound a little tricky, but the compliance department or the compliance function in a company doesn't do compliance. The rest of the company does. So when the sales guys say, well, I don't have to do compliance, that's what the compliance department does. That's where I think they're really having a disconnect. And then the second thing is that, and we've titled this podcast, We're All on the Yellow Submarine, because we want to honor, today is actually the day we're recording is John Lennon's birthday. So it's appropriate for us to honor John Lennon and the Beatles and the Yellow Submarine, because we are all on the Yellow Submarine, that really senior management and the compliance function are on the same boat. And you've articulated, I think, some very good reasons, both regulatory and business. But let me throw in one more reason, which is that to do business with an American company or a company from England or a company from Brazil or a company from Sweden, if you're in a high risk or emerging market, you're going to have a compliance program, because every American company that does business outside the United States can only do business with, or at least to protect itself from potential Foreign Corrupt Practices Act exposure, must do business with companies that have compliance programs. So there's actually a business reason to do compliance, to not only have a compliance program that's set up and run by the compliance function, as you've articulated, but also the kind of same boat we're in concept. If you have a business reason, there is a business reason for having a compliance program, and it can actually make you more marketable to Western or UK or US companies. So it's really interesting when you put us all in the same boat of having to do compliance, when you overlay that with the obligations of an English or an American company to do business with companies that have compliance programs, I think you have a very powerful argument for why really everyone's on the same boat, and that compliance is not simply something that the compliance department does. So on number two, Tim, corporate concept number two, and this is one that speaks directly to the compliance professional, and I suspect you've had faced this issue once or twice before, which is, does the in-house compliance team ever have sufficient resources to do compliance? And I recognize that this could be a controversial statement, but it's also really a fact of corporate life, that you never get the amount of money you do, yet you as the compliance professional are required to effectively implement a corporate compliance program. So how do you address something like this that really everyone faces, Tim?
Yes, Tom. Yeah, thanks for getting to this point, which, as I fully agree with you, is very important to any compliance practitioner. It's about budgeting, it's about resources. And here, I might be kind of not an ordinary compliance practitioner. The thing is that, first of all, I think it looks to be a very controversial statement, which in my view might easily become subject to speculations in internal discussions between management and compliance department, meaning that compliance people have been saying that we don't have enough resources. I'm ready to recall arguments encouraging us as the in-house community to decrease the number of complaints on lack of resources. To start with, if the standard to be followed is duly defined in an organization, for instance, compliance with FCPA based on 10 hallmarks, you can at least roughly estimate resources you need rather than exclaiming constantly without any justification that compliance department is suffering due to lack of resources. By the way, risk assessment could be a very powerful instrument in assessment hotspots for which you need resources. I think it will prevent you from boiling the ocean by conducting activities of low added value and consequently will prevent waste of resources. In addition, I think that we should talk about innovations, or let's say in this way, innovations. I know, Tom, that you touch this topic frequently, which in my view is very important for compliance profession. From innovations in methods of doing things to new technologies, things have been changing. Nowadays, many technologies become available literally for free. Sometimes compliance people just do not know about that. For instance, my own children taught me how to make a video with special effects using a smartphone. 10 years ago, to make a compliance video for personnel was a big project, which required budget and engagement of dedicated agency. So what are your views, Tom, about that?
So let me take this one really from a couple of different directions, Tim. The first one is I'll pick up with your point number 2 on innovations. And I'm doing a 1-year podcast series. I do a podcast every day on how to have a more effective compliance program. And each month I take a deep dive into one particular topic. And each day I give you 3 key takeaways that you can implement into your compliance program at little or no cost. So when you speak of innovations, I couldn't agree with you more. I don't know if this concept translates between Texan and Ukrainian, but as a lawyer, we say you're only limited by your imagination. And certainly for the compliance professional, you are only limited by your imagination. And your example of having your children show you how to do a video with a smartphone is absolutely a perfect example of that. My example is when I tried to set up a Facebook business page, I told my daughter, who was then 12, I would give her $100 if she could do it in 24 hours. 20 minutes later, she came to me and said, "Okay, Dad, give me the 100." But what I learned from that experience is always hire a subject matter expert. And, she was a 12-year-old who knew how to navigate Facebook. So there are going to be people in your organization who are millennials, Tim, who can do innovative and unique things through social media, with social media, and with the tools of social media that you can incorporate into your compliance program. So that's really one thing that I would really like to pick up on. Number 2 is that how are you going to defend the resources you have? And by that, I mean not just to your senior management, but what are you going to do when a regulator comes knocking? Are you going to say, well, gosh, we did all we could with what we had available to us. Now, we didn't stop this bribery and corruption, but, we did the best we could. That's not going to protect you, and it's not going to protect the company. A friend of mine named Stephen Martin is a former U.S. prosecutor, and he tells the following story. The first question he would say is, how much money did your company spend last year on yellow sticky note pads? And the answer was, $1 million, $2 million, whatever it was. And then he would say, how much money did your compliance program have to spend? And the answer was $250,000 or $500,000. And his question then was, what's more mission critical to your company, having an effective compliance program or yellow sticky note pads? And the point of that is you can substitute anything in. You can substitute paper clips, you can substitute pencils, pens, erasers, whatever it may be, staples. And a company has to be able to justify the amount of money they spent. And if the money is $100,000 or $200,000 and you're spending $1 million a year on sticky note pads, that's going to get you into trouble. So senior management truly needs to understand that resources and resource allocation to the compliance function is really critical. So the resources, the regulators want to see resources. They said that in the FCPA pilot program. They said that in the evaluation of corporate compliance programs released in February 2017, and they said it back in 2012 with the release of the FCPA guidance. So from both the compliance program perspective, the regulatory perspective, you're going to have to use the resources. And then really the third point, Tim, is, and it follows from your point on innovation, it is that compliance needs to partner with other disciplines within a corporation. So for instance, if you have don't have budget for a full training and you don't have access to your children who can show you how to do recording on a smartphone, perhaps you could partner with HR, and when they put on anti-discrimination or other types of training, they could have a few words about compliance. You can get internal audit to when they do a regular audit rotation of key suppliers or key third-party sales agents, add some compliance issues to that internal audit. So partner up with different corporate functions, and that can be a way for you to stretch your resources by utilizing other corporate resources. So I think, Tim, you've raised this question is one that's ongoing for compliance practitioners. Frankly, we never have enough money, and we're never going to have enough money. And so the issue is, how do you handle not having all the resources you want? How do you get and utilize the resources that are available to you? And I would always say, once again, you're only limited by your imagination.
Sounds great, Tom. And actually, I made some notes while you were talking about these yellow sticky notepads. So I think it is a very vivid example to remember for compliance people like myself. And thank you for this practical insight with regard to a good idea, having partnership with other departments when you're trying to embed compliance activities for which you probably might be limited in terms of the budget, for instance.
So, Tim, what would you say are, from where you're sitting, some of the key takeaways from today?
Sure. The first one will be, hopefully my children won't take the example of making money on me, Tom. So I hope that their assistance with all these innovations will be free. Well, I understand that in your case it didn't work like that. So hopefully, at least in my case, it will work. But besides that, so what we have seen, that a compliance practitioner should clearly understand his role in organization, along with the role of key stakeholders in implementation of the corporate ethics program. Probably number two, a compliance practitioner should understand the standards and applicable laws to be followed by organization, along with the resources he needs to reach the above-mentioned requirements. In addition, your practical insight with regard to yellow sticky notepads, let's remember it's like that, partnership with other departments, and of course, as you have said, we are all on a yellow submarine.
Well, that's certainly true as well, Tim. Tim, if anyone wanted to follow up with you directly on any of the points we've raised, could they email you? And if so, how would they do it?
Sure. I would recommend to refer to the website www.complianceinpostussr.com. There our listeners will be able to see some of our comic series, some recommendations with regard to implementation of the compliance program in the post-Soviet Union, along with other pieces. So yeah, thanks for giving me a chance to talk about the website as well, Tom.
Well, very good. So this has been Tom Fox and Timur Khasanov-Batirov, and we have been bringing you another episode of Compliance Man Goes Global. I hope you have enjoyed this episode, and I hope you'll join us again as we further explore doing compliance in emerging and high-risk markets. Thank you for listening. This is Tom Fox again. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Compliance Report International Edition with Compliance Man Goes Global, Episode 2. If you've listened to this podcast on iTunes, please rate this podcast as it would help in our rankings and also help get the word about the only compliance report which focuses on the international aspects of bribery and corruption across the globe. Also, you can reach me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Finally, the